Profound changes are occurring in the American public's connection to nature, the outdoors, and wildlife. At the same time, there's a growing body of evidence that contact with nature is not just a recreational amenity, but it's fundamental to human health and well-being. In 2011, DJK staff gathered with Dr. Kellert at our office to explore how to better understand and foster Americans' relationship with nature. As Steve Williams said, Dr. Kellert has been a leader, I would offer the leader, in researching and articulating the importance of contact with nature and human health and well-being. The result of that meeting in 2011 was the Nature of Americans, a national initiative to understand and connect Americans and nature. The subject of my comments this morning. It's been an honor for the social scientists and other staff at DJK's to work alongside Dr. Kellert, and it's a privilege to be here this morning before you to share some of this unprecedented results. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the partners in this initiative. Special thanks go to Carter Smith, the director in Texas, Nick Wiley, the director in Florida, former U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Dan Ash, and Kim Sams and Beth Stevens at Disney for their early leadership and support for this initiative. The understanding part of this initiative includes 3 major research efforts conducted in 2015 and 2016. Focus groups across the country with a wide spectrum of adult Americans, a representative online survey of over 10,000 adult Americans, and interviews with 771 8 to 12-year-old children. These were conducted via webcam to webcam interviews, and for each of those children, we also conducted an online survey of one of their parents. We have a mountain of data, actually we have a mountain range of data, and we're going to skim across some peaks today. This presentation really is a sneak peek at the results, if you will. Formal public release of the results will begin in April. We'll start on April 19th. So the public results will be available on April 19th. What I'm going to do this morning is first talk about Americans' disconnection from nature. Secondly, contrast that to Americans' interest in nature. And finally, share 5 recommendations, and really almost challenges to you all, 5 recommendations for the conservation community. Disconnection. I almost don't need to describe the things that disconnect Americans from nature in daily life. You see them every day in your families, in your friends, and in your communities. But let me describe 3 reasons for disconnection that the American public shared with us through this research. The first source of disconnection is competing priorities. Americans face competing priorities for their time, attention, and money. They have children, long commutes, and exhausting jobs. The mother of a young child told us in a focus group, work and home, go put the kids to bed, that's pretty much all we have time for. She was not alone. Almost half of the adults surveyed across the U.S. agreed with the statement, there are more important issues in my life than my concern for nature. One of the effects of competing priorities is that Americans spend a relatively little time outside in nature. Over half said they spend less than 5 hours a week outside. Most Americans are spending their time indoors. From our study, we heard about a second reason for disconnection from nature. Among adults, shared experience about what good connection to nature looks like have changed. Older adults observed how it used to be normal to spend time exploring, playing, and discovering outdoors. Now they worry because it's not the same for their children and grandchildren. And this was really interesting as a theme that we saw in all the research, of that genuine concern about the disconnection. Genuine concern that the younger generations are growing up without the same nature experiences that they had and were so positive and important to them. If the shared expectation used to be that kids spend most of their time playing outdoors, that's no longer the case. We asked parents, in a typical week, how much time does your child spend on the following activities? There was a long list of activities, and they're grouped here and reported by age. You can see on the left side of the chart, time on computers and TV towers over time spent outdoors. And this increases with age, from 8 up to 12. While time spent outdoors decreases as the children get older in that age group. Here's a second example of shifting expectations. Most adults in our study reported spending relatively little time outside, as we just talked about. And most were satisfied with that, though. The group who spent 2 hours or less, so the folks, that was about 25% that you saw in the previous graph, who spent 2 hours or less outdoors each week, which is not much time, nearly half of those, as you see on the graphic here, are satisfied with that amount of time. 47% are satisfied with spending 2 hours or less outside. It's becoming normal in American society to spend relatively little time outdoors. So you can't rely on shared expectations or general social norms to get people outdoors. We're going to have to be more explicit. I'll come back to the importance of shared expectations later in the presentation. When I talk about expectation, Americans hold that authentic nature is located in faraway places and requires great effort to reach, and I'll come back to that. I've talked about competing priorities and shared expectations. A third reason for disconnection is the physical places where Americans live. Americans live in physical spaces that discourage contact with the natural world and even representations of it. They mention the concrete jungle of cities, housing developments, and only low-quality parks nearby. Perhaps it's not a surprise then that so many adults say their pastimes, hobbies, and interests are more indoors-oriented, 40%. 1/4 say their hobbies and interests are outdoors-oriented. As I've described, Americans encounter a number of forces that disconnect them from nature, and these are society-wide issues. They're massive, and they're going to require all sorts of organizations and sectors to work together. But that doesn't mean the situation is hopeless. What I want to show now is the potential for Americans to connect with nature. American adults are interested in nature. We ask, how do your interest in nature compare with your other interests? A quarter of adults say their interest in nature are their most enjoyable interest. And another half say it's among their more enjoyable interests. Children also enjoy nature in a number of different ways. They think insects are interesting. They enjoy activities like climbing trees and camping. And my favorite, 70% of the children that we interviewed said they would rather explore woods and trees than play on neat-looking grass. That seemed like a big win. In fact, nature for children is fun. When asked, do you have more fun playing indoors or outdoors, only 10% said they have more fun playing indoors. Over 40% said they had more fun playing outdoors. Alongside interest and enjoyment of nature, Americans also recognize nature's benefits to their health and well-being. 3 out of 4 adults say that getting into nature is very or extremely important for their physical health. 3/4 say getting into nature is very or extremely important for their physical health. When we asked the same about emotional outlook, the results were the same. Again, 3 out of 4 said getting into nature is very or extremely important for their emotional outlook. Adults are not the only one who recognize the benefits of nature. Children also recognize that nature helps them to grow healthy, to be happy, to enjoy family and friends, and to know that they are important and liked. These are just a few of the many things that we ask the children. Adults see the benefit of nature not only for health and well-being, but also intellectual development. Despite the emphasis you see on core subjects in school, the overwhelming majority agree that understanding how nature works is as important to a child's education as reading, writing, and math. And it's important to point out for this slide and most of the slides that I've covered just now, the patterns that hold up against demographics. In other words, across age groups, residential location, race and ethnicity, gender, and income, there's not much variation in the answers that you saw. So it's a very positive story, and not a lot of variation. I've talked about enjoyment of nature and recognition of nature's benefits. Let's add one more reason for optimism: support for nature programming and funding. We ask a number of questions to explore this. I'm going to report just one. Are programs for Americans to enjoy nature and wildlife underfunded, adequately funded, or overfunded? Half of adults think programs for Americans to enjoy nature and wildlife are underfunded. Only 3% said overfunded. There's hope. American adults and children are interested in nature, recognize nature's benefits to them, and support nature-related programming and funding and conservation. Yet those massive society-wide barriers still exist. Competing priorities, shared expectations in physical places, and unfortunately, lots of others that we explored. Those all work to keep children and adults disconnected from nature. So what do you as a conservation community do to overcome the gap between interest and action? I have 5 recommendations. The first recommendation is to redefine connecting to nature. When you all here in this room think of connecting with nature, many of you think of this: alone, immersed in a remote setting. Or this. A once-in-a-lifetime trip to an iconic place. And no surprise, adults in our research have bought into these expectations about what true or pure experiences in nature are. As one respondent said, nature is the Grand Canyon, nature at its best. When I went, it's beautiful. I've never seen it before, like nature out there by itself. Yet, what our research shows is that the majority of Americans cannot experience nature in this way. They don't have the money, they don't have the time, or even if they do have the money and the time, they may be only able to do it once a year or once in a lifetime. If people are convinced that nature is something that you can only experience at distant refuge or a park or natural area, then they're going to miss out on the opportunity to experience nature's benefits on a routine, day-to-day basis. And we offer that that's a really important aspect of engaging with nature. And our results show that children consistently place nature as local, out the back door. When you ask children about nature, they think of it as out the back door and local. It's not far away. For children, you don't need to load them in the car, yet again, to give them times in the outdoors they will never forget or a special place to remember. And I would add here that we have, on all the surveys, an opportunity for children or adults or parents to not just respond to questions, but to offer their thoughts in writing or by speaking. And it's a real rich set of information, very inspiring and heartbreaking in some cases. So connection to nature has to be redefined to include routine action, not just one-off events. It has to be expanded to include recreational activities that are not just nature-focused. In other words, people can engage with nature, enjoy nature, connect with nature as part of other activities in their daily or weekly lives. Our second recommendation is to be social. And here I don't mean social media, though that is important for other reasons. Wildlife biologists, fisheries biologists, conservation professionals aren't necessarily known for being social. In fact, a lot of us got into this field because we would rather be out looking at all those critters that we saw than dealing with people. But in other words, connection to nature needs to have a social aspect. Nature experienced alone can be a powerful thing, but this is the exception, not the primary way that adults and children interact with nature. Americans are clear. When they talk about their most memorable moments and their special places outdoors, they nearly always talk about the people that were involved in those. Americans make time for nature when they have the social support to do so and when the activities involve their friends and family. To reinforce this point, 51% of adults indicated they do not like being in nature by themselves. 51%, when given the opportunity, agreed or were neutral when read the statement, "I don't like being in nature by myself." Being social means supporting mentorships of all types, for example, inviting pre-existing social groups to programs, and promoting engagement with nature as something fun to do that you do with other people. So recommendation 1 was redefining connection with nature. 2 was be social. And 3 is to consider both similarities and differences. Pay close attention to how Americans are different and how they are similar in their relationships with nature. We found many similarities in Americans' relationship with nature across residential, location, race and ethnicity, political party, geographic region, and so on. Overall, Americans of all types say they enjoy nature. Again, not much variation in these. Enjoy nature, like to experience it with others, have deep affection and attraction toward it, and support programming and funding and conservation. But we also found some clear differences, especially in how different groups are concerned about their safety when they're outdoors, who is present in these activities, and the type of activity they're interested in. So here's an example of similarity. Look at the way adults agree with the statement, "The intelligence of future generations will suffer if our society becomes more isolated from nature." Now that question in itself is a pretty cool question. The intelligence of future generations will suffer if our society becomes more isolated from nature. This slide shows agreement across race and ethnicity. The differences here are not large enough that you'd make different management decisions or different promotion or communications decisions. Same question, but this time by urban, rural, and suburban. Virtually no difference there. And these are self-reported. The respondents self-reported if they consider themselves to live in an urban setting or a suburban setting or a rural setting. And I should point out that the location, this urban, rural, suburban, really surprised us. The patterns we were expecting to see with big differences along those three things really didn't show up in so many things. There were some, but not nearly what we expected. As an example of difference, though, let's take kind of an extreme one in this case. Consider interest in taking a walk outdoors. This was one activity in a long list that we asked adults about. How would you rate your interest in this case, taking a walk outdoors. The majority of adults have a lot of interest in taking a walk outdoors. Very few have no interest at all. But if we contrast that with hiking, same question, but hiking. Walking outdoors versus hiking. It's not much of a difference maybe to a lot of you in this room, but it's obviously a big difference. None at all, goes up quite a bit. Here's another example, same question. This is a look at interest in hiking across age groups. Starting at the top left of the graph, note that half the adults in their 20s are highly interested in hiking. That interest declines steadily until about 10% of adults in their 70s have a lot of interest in it. So while Americans are often alike in their interests and their values of nature, age, location, and race and ethnicity, and other factors can really be important sources of difference. The fourth recommendation is to promote multidimensional experiences. The conservation community often thinks and develops programs based on increasing recreation or instilling formal knowledge. That tends to be the approach we use about the natural world. But both of these are critically important, and as you've seen, are actually supported by the American public. Those are critically important. But the American public, adults and children alike, care about and experience and engage with nature in many dimensions, not just as a recreation or a knowledge perspective. Being in nature gives me a sense of peace. 86% said somewhat or strongly agree with that statement. They hold affection toward nature in different ways. They find being in nature gives meaning and purpose to their lives. 70% said that. These questions and a host of others show America want to engage in nature in a variety of ways. When you look at all these statements as conservationists, you see your values represented there. I think it's really gratifying to see Americans share those to the degree that most of you, I surely didn't expect to see that commonality with the things that you care about and how deeply you care and how the American public cares. Finally, recommendation 5, claim a seat at the table. If you just talk about hunting or fishing or wildlife viewing as recreational activities or wildlife management tools, as vitally important as those are to conservation, both of those, you don't have a seat at the table where the big issues are being discussed: healthcare, education, transportation, urban planning. And these are the arenas in which decisions are being made that have large-scale impacts on people, large-scale impacts on the landscape, and large-scale impacts on the intersection of those two things. If we want to overcome these massive societal problems, if you want to have an influence far larger than your current budgets, then you'll need to claim a seat at the table. The big question for the conservation community then becomes, how do you build partnerships with the education system and the healthcare system, with community developers, with tourism boards, so that you are expanding your impact in ways that promote socially oriented, routine contact with nature? I spoke with Dr. Kellert for the last time on November 17th, 2016, 10 days before he passed away. He was in the hospital, but during the call, we jumped back and forth talking about his medical treatment, about the initiative. Toward the end of that conversation, Steve was reflecting on the results of the research and said, "We probed more about what it means to be a human being. We probed more about what it means to be a human being." You were in the business of human flourishing. Is that too sweeping of a comment? Steve Kellert didn't think so. I don't think so. And gratefully, most Americans don't think so either. You, the conservation community, are not just in the business of providing a place for nature to thrive. You're not just in the business of overseeing recreational activities. When you conserve species and when you protect and restore habitats, you're in the business of helping Americans live happier, healthier lives. You're in the business of helping children develop socially, psychologically, and physically. You're in the business of helping create places where Americans want to live, to work, and to flourish. Connection to nature and wildlife is fundamental to the economic and social well-being of our country and a critical component of American culture and history. For those of us here in this room, nature is not a dispensable amenity. It's woven into the story of our lives individually and as a community. We must make that a reality for all Americans, regardless of where they live or who they are. Thank you.